You've finished your Aegean ornaments cross stitch kit, and now it's time to turn it into ornaments. You're going to start by marking around each motif 3/4 of an inch out. And I just mark that with like a blue, I use a seam gauge or a ruler, 3/4 of an inch out. Let's see if it'll focus on that. And you're going to mark that 3/4 of an inch on every side, like that. Every side of every motif, of all 4 motifs. Then you're going to trim along those lines so that you have all 4 of your pieces with a 3/4 of an inch hem or finishing allowance. I've trimmed all of my ornaments so that there's 3/4 of an inch from where the stitching ends to where I've trimmed the fabric. For this sort of application, you don't really need to pull a thread and do a drawn thread hem channel like I show in some of my other videos. Just measuring out with a ruler and marking it with a pencil and trimming it is fine. And then I've also cut my piece of lining that comes in the kit. I've cut it into 4 pieces, 5 inches by 5 inches. Now, for most of my kit, most of my finishing, I'm going to simply put a piece of lining fabric over it, turn it over, and I'm going to stitch around it, leaving an opening. But for some things, I'm going to want to put a loop in. If I want to use it as an ornament or hang it on the wall or on a little stand on a table or something, then I'm going to need to add a loop. And to do that, I just take my leftover floss like this, and I make a braid with it, just a simple little braid. I do put a knot at either end, and I make it, maybe about 6 inches long. I'm going to then take that braid like this, like that, loop it, and I'm going to set it on top of the ornament, but I'm looking to see about where the center line of the ornament is, and I'm putting the loop right sides facing with the embroidery, and then I'm going to just very simply put a pin in there to hold it in place. You'll notice that I have a knot in either end, and the reason I do that is so that the braid doesn't slip out of the seam once you're all done. Because if you don't have some sort of way to anchor it, it will slip out of the seam because all the floss will separate and do that. So just put that there. I tend to put the knot way out here, right near the cut edge of the fabric, because otherwise it's going to be really tough to sew. And so right here, I'm just going to take a pin, and I'm just going to pin through that braid just to kind of hold it in place. It's just to hold it in place. I'll kind of double check it at the sewing machine, or if I'm sewing it by hand, I'll just kind of fiddle with it a bit. And then I'm going to put the lining piece over it. Now, I'm going to sew these by machine, but you can sew them by hand as well. And all I'm going to do is, starting at the bottom edge, right about here, I am going to stitch 1/4 of an inch away from the embroidery. That leaves you a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to start stitching here, and I'm going to stitch around like this, 1/4 of an inch away. I'm going to go here, double check that my loop is secure, come around like this, and then come back, and I'm going to stop about here. And what that means is that right in here, for about, it's about an inch, about 2 inches, I'm going to leave an opening to turn my ornament. I've sewn my 1/4 of an inch out from the embroidery. That leaves me with a 1/2 inch seam allowance here, all the way around, leaving a 2 inch opening here. I am now going to trim the seam allowance because this is a small piece, and generally speaking, the smaller the thing you're sewing, you want to trim down that seam allowance because otherwise it's going to be a little bit bulky and it's not going to turn easily. So now, using my scissors, I am just going to trim it like this. When I get to the corners, I'm going to get a little close there, but not too close, okay? Like if you go too close, then you risk cutting through the even weave fabric. But kind of like this, okay? Now, when I get to the loop like this, I kind of cut out and around like that because I don't want to cut through that knot. If you look in here, I have that knot right in there, and that's going to actually secure that little braided loop there. So I want to leave that as is. So I'm going to kind of cut around it and go like this. Go like this. Here we go. Again, you're just reducing bulk so that you don't have too much extra fabric in there when you're trying to turn it. And it's going to look like this. And now you're going to grab either a bamboo turner or a chopstick, and we're going to turn it inside out. And you're going to just open it up through that little opening. Now, it is tight because that 2-inch opening is not really big. So it's a little tight, but you're going to turn it inside out, the whole thing inside out, like this, working carefully and just gently and carefully and turning that out like this. Pretty soon you'll see your loop come out like that. You don't have to have a bamboo turner. I mean, I have one because I always have one at my little sewing station. You can also use a chopstick. And actually, my preference is a chopstick. I find that they have a little bit more maneuverability. You tend to always have one in your kitchen. And so I like a chopstick. And what I'm doing with this bamboo turner is I'm just gently getting in there and easing out the corners. Again, very gently. And this is just sort of a first pass. The other thing you can do too is you can just lightly, gently pull your chopstick or your bamboo turner against your embroidery like that, against the seam. That also helps kind of like, it helps it kind of like get it a little bit crisp. And there, like my corner just popped out there. And see here, I've got my little loop is now like ready to go up here. Now I'm going to keep working my way around, and I'm gently, gently pushing out those corners. Now, sometimes you're going to get one like this that doesn't really want to go out. So I go all the way around with my bamboo turner, kind of doing that as best as I can with the bamboo turner. And then to really finesse those corners, I grab a pin or a used sewing machine needle, and then I get in there like this and I pull them out. And you need to do kind of carefully and gently, so you don't do that, like pull through a fiber. But if you do this kind of gently, this is kind of like, it helps you finesse those corners a little bit. Just do it gently so you're not pulling on threads. But if you have a corner that's being a little bit on the stubborn side, this usually works. So I just keep kind of gently pulling out. I get that sewing machine needle in between that seam, and then it kind of just gently pulls it out. And that's what it's going to look like right now. Now you can see I have my opening at the bottom. I always put my opening at the bottom because it's the area least likely to draw the eye. Now I'm going to go to the ironing board and I'm going to press this. I've lightly pressed my ornament. It allows me to kind of get this opening down here nice and even before I start stuffing it with something. Now for this one, I'm going to go ahead and turn it into a lightly little stuffed ornament. And so I have a big pile of cotton batting right here. Now there's some tricks to working with cotton batting, and I'm sure you can find people online who are even better at it than I am. But this is how I was taught to work with it. Now for this, I definitely recommend a chopstick. You're going to take the opening here and you're going to pick up some of the chopstick, pick up some of that batting, and you're going to just gently put it in your ornament. Now, you're going to keep kind of feeding it in, but not too much at one time. That's the real trick. And then what you're going to do is you're going to use that chopstick to kind of push it down into the corners like that. Because it's always if the corners aren't nice and stuffed down here, that's what actually makes your ornament look kind of, what should we say, homemade as opposed to handmade. So you're going to keep stuffing it with a little bit of stuffing like this. The chopstick just gives you really good maneuverability like this. And you're going to keep going, and you're going to kind of get it first into those corners, really nicely in those corners like that. And I get the corners pretty stuffed. And I'm kind of just feeling and going, do I want it like, is that too stuffed? Is it not stuffed enough? The biggest thing with the batting is you have to kind of pull it apart and get some air into it. And it's kind of messy. If you're using this cotton batting, it like puts these little, like, I don't know, there must be like little cotton bits all over. So wherever you're going to do this, it's going to be a little bit messy. You can also use, I've used kapok before, which is another type of natural fiber. You can start by stuffing it in with your like finger, but if you want to really get it into all the little bits and bobs, you want to use a chopstick. Now, one tip here is if you've got the the loop with the braid, you do not want those knots to show on the front of your ornament. So you want to make sure that those knots get on the back side here. So kind of work the stuffing to get it over those knots so that they aren't, otherwise they'll be visible, like kind of through your ornament, and you don't want that. So you want to keep doing that, and keep pulling out batting, and you're going to keep stuffing it. And you'll reach a point where you're like, wow, is that like too much stuffing? And usually at that point, you're like, nope, you need a little bit more. So you kind of keep stuffing it and compacting it in there, but doing it evenly, bit by bit by bit, like this. And then I just keep going. It really is a matter of personal preference. If you're making a pin cushion, you can use walnut shells. My neighbor just taught me that recently, and it makes a really nice pin cushion and heavy. It makes it kind of a really solid, sturdy pin cushion. Now right here, I'm like, okay, that's starting to feel pretty good, and I'm going to keep putting a little bit more stuffing in there because I've got some little spots that aren't quite the way I want them to feel, or they look a little lumpy. Usually, if your ornament looks a little lumpy, it's because you haven't put quite enough stuffing in. Honestly, it almost always feels like you're putting in way too much. And then you get done and you're like, oh, that was just the right amount. So, and I'm going to now tuck it into these other corners. And again, I'm still pulling it apart and doing this and stuffing in some more. Now, when I get to this end like this, I'll just use kind of ever smaller little bits of stuffing, because now I really do kind of want to control what it feels like. And I want it to be like nicely stuffed, but I also do not want it to be like too stuffed. It's like if it's understuffed, it's going to look lumpy, and if it's overstuffed, it's going to look lumpy. It's sort of a Goldilocks situation here, and you're just going to keep doing that. Now, once we have that done, the next step is going to be to, yeah, that actually feels pretty good. If you're uncertain, you can always go over to your ironing board at this point, and you can smash it with your iron and see if it looks the way you want it to look. And in the next step, I'll show you how to blind stitch that opening closed. So we've got our ornament stuffed the way we want it to feel. Feels nice and firm. And now we need to stitch this opening closed with what's called a blind stitch. I am using a sharp needle. This is a sharp needle. And I'm using Aurifil thread. This is the thread I like the best for hand sewing like this because it's really light, but still very strong. So, if you have trouble sometimes when you're doing your hand sewing and you feel like your stitches are really visible and they're not like as invisible as you'd like them, oftentimes it's the thread you're using because you want to use a really fine thread. Aurifil is a quilting thread, and I used to use it for hand quilting, but it works fantastic for hand sewing too. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually pinch that closed, and starting on the back, I'm going to do a little base bar tack knot. It's not really a knot, it's a bar tack, and what that means is I am pulling this through and kind of stitching the thread to itself a couple of times, a couple of little bars, and that actually takes the place of a knot. Now what I'm going to do is as I hold this closed, I am going to go and pick up a tiny bit of the fabric on this side, maybe about 3 or 4 threads. Do you see that like that? Then I'm going to pull it through. Now, I'm not going to pull it very taut. I'm going to hold the fabric like this. I'm going to kind of pinch it. And then I'm going to do the same thing across the side. I'm going to put it in and take maybe, this one I did about, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch. And I'm going to pull that taut like that. The first stitch can be a little bit wonky as you're getting established. Then I'm going to do it again, and I'm going to go across to the front side of the work, and I'm going to pull that stitch, and then I'm going to come to the back side, and I'm going to take a little stitch here. And what I'm doing is that thread is actually being hidden in the folded over part of the piece, and as I pull it snug, that's going to make my stitches essentially be like little bars spaced across the work. And what that does is it creates a little invisible seam, as if you'd almost sewn it on a sewing machine. I find with with blind stitching like this, you can just work it about every 1/8 of an inch apart. It doesn't need to be crazy close together. This is enough because, again, and you also have to think about what you're finishing. This is a small little ornament and there's not going to be any stress on this seam, so you'll be just fine to just keep doing like a little light bar tack about every eighth to quarter of an inch across is enough. And so you can see right there as I do that and I pull it tight, it pulls it tight. And I'm going to finish that all the way across the seam. And then I'm going to sink my thread on the other end just like I started the bar tack. I have finished sewing my blind stitch. I've blind stitched my seam closed along the bottom. And then the last step I do is I take it to the ironing board and I iron along every edge just to kind of help set these seams and give them a little bit of a professional finish. And then my ornament is done. These are a wonderful small project. They're great to give as gifts. You can fill them with walnut shells and turn them into a pincushion. You can, if you don't want something stuffed, the other alternative is to use a product called Peltex. It's a type of thicker interfacing, and you can put it in here and turn this into a coaster. You could even turn these into a patch to sew to clothing or tote bags. These are just a really fun project.